Welcome to a brand new episode of the All Hoops podcast. I'm your host, Steve Inman, joined as always by producer to the stars and my co-host, Chris Brito. With the playoffs beginning Saturday, Chris and I will break down each matchup and make our predictions for the first round of the NBA playoffs. Also, we'll discuss which stars need to make a long playoff run the most. Before we get to all that, Chris, my friend, how are you?
Hey, Stevie. Happy to be here on another episode of the All Hoops podcast. We have the NBA playoffs coming up. We're still waiting on the two playing games, but, we feel pretty confident about the people facing the eventual winners of those. But I think we have a really interesting, first few opening rounds because I think there's some potential sleepers, upsets that could happen. I think one of the bigger ones, one of the marquee ones, is something that we're both sort of divided on, and it's the Brooklyn Nets versus the Boston Celtics series. And I know you had some thoughts, but before our podcast, I think you were unsure about it. So walk me through your thought process right now with that matchup.
Yeah, I'm really conflicted because this Nets team, when they are at their best, I believe they can beat anybody. I think they can be world champs, but they're not at their best. Seth Curry did not look healthy in the play-in game that we went and saw. I don't think he winded up scoring for the entire game. Don't even get me started on Ben Simmons. They keep talking about how he's coming back. A guy who has not played all year with a back problem, who was exposed as a non-offensive player in the playoffs last year. So he's not going to be, I don't see him as any factor at all. But at the end of the day, you have Kyrie Irving, you have Kevin Durant. And I believe those are the two best players in this series, believe it or not. So you have those two best guys. Does that mean you can go out and win the series? I think you could. And, Robert Williams, with the Time Lord himself, was a great piece for this Boston team. He's out. There's reports that he could be back later in the series, but he had a 4 to 6 week timeline originally. I don't see him coming back. So I think this is going to be a 6 or 7 game series, and I'm going to take the Nets.
Okay, so does that mean you're going to put a bet on the Nets-Boston series and putting it on the Nets?
Already have them. I have a bet of them going to the finals.
Interesting. Well, listen, I think you bring up a great point about the Nets having the best player in the series, but Jason Tatum is not far off from that. And I think that playing at home in Boston, I think that's going to really help the Boston Celtics moving forward. And so I think the Celtics actually have the upper hand just because they've actually had reps with the team. And I think that they've really developed a nice chemistry since the Knicks beat them in that buzzer beater a few weeks back. And it was a total reversal of fortunes for both our teams. In any case, I'm picking the Celtics in that one. The Nets have a lot more question marks than the Celtics do. And as great as Kyrie Irving is, Jaylen Brown is a fantastic player who can hold his own. And frankly, I think that the Celtics have better role players than
they absolutely do. They do, especially with Curry not 100%.
And I think that makes a difference in this series. Like, who's the third best player on the Nets who could match up with the Marcus Smart right now? Like, is that probably Drummond? Is that Patty Mills?
I mean, it depends on the night, right? I mean, Bruce Brown looked awesome in that play-in game. I think he had like 18, 9, and 8 or something like that. If he's going to give you that, that's kind of what they needed from Ben Simmons. So if you get that from him on a daily basis, I think they're going to be in great shape. Nick Claxton was another guy who was really good in that series. I think the Nets bigs, Claxton and Drummond, have been very overlooked this year. And now you're facing Boston, who does not have their big in Robert Williams. You're probably going to be putting Horford in those minutes. The Nets have to take advantage. They have to play big at times, and they have to show that those bigs can get those offensive rebounds, get Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving extra shots. And I think if they do that, the Nets are going to be in a decent position to make this a long series.
That being said, though, is Drummond and Claxton really going to provide that much of a lift where it becomes an advantage for the Nets? That's
the question. That's the
question.
I
don't see Horford is probably just as good right now as those guys. I don't know. I mean,
I don't know either.
I
Maybe I'm
like
overhyping them based on
yeah,
this last game, but I do believe that Horford is old and these other
he
guys
is
at
old.
least are serviceable. So my belief is that those guys can be a factor.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's move on to another series that we both think is a little bit up in the air. I mean, at least for me, the Sixers Raptor series. And to me, the Sixers obviously have the two most talented players in that whole like series, which is James Harden and Joel Embiid. So, but now we have an added element in that Thibault won't be able to play in Toronto because he's not vaccinated, and I wonder if the Celtics team has enough reps together with James Harden because he was a big piece that they added in the middle of the season. Um, I wonder if the Raptors could upset them. I actually have the Raptors like I'm not willing to bet on it, but I feel really good about the Raptors in the series. They have all the tools to beat the Sixers.
Yeah, I normally am picking favorites, and we're going to be 2 for 2 and picking underdogs for me. I think the Raptors are going to do it. I don't love the construction of this Philly team. They looked unbelievable that first couple of games with Harden and Embiid. They're going to the free throw line basically every couple of seconds, right? It has not gone as well since. And I believe this Raptor team is so physical, so good defensively without fouling that, yes, James Harden and Embiid are going to get to the free throw line plenty, but I don't think it's going to be as much as they'd like. And I think it's going to be a long, hard fought series. And I think the Raptors' experience in these situations is going to help them a lot.
The other added element to this is that, if we think about a team that could beat the Sixers, it has to be a team that is flexible enough and that could probably like spread the floor and be interchangeable. And that is literally the Raptors, or how we call it, the Heat of the North. Um, they're just so good defensively and could match up in so many different ways. And I don't know if the Sixers are that flexible in that regard. And so I do have questions as to the Raptors if like, will they score enough points? But listen, in Toronto, they won't have the added element of having to deal with Thibault, who's a very good defensive player for the Sixers. So I wonder how much that of a fact that's going to be a factor for me to watch during this series as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's just kind of a nothing burger on offense. I mean, he can hit some shots. He's great defensively. I don't think he's going to make that swing. I think he helps, but obviously the series is going to come down to Harden, Embiid, and Tobias Harris making shots, being efficient. How is Harden's turnovers? His turnovers have been out of control in the playoffs in the past. This is, one of those years where he really needs to have a good playoff series. There's all the talk about that. And then, by the way, something that hasn't been talked about, he did not opt into his contract. So he's going to be a free agent this upcoming summer. And if he wants that super max from Philly, he's going to have to show that he's the Harden of old of the regular season and not an old Harden who has been struggling the postseason the last few years.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect to James Harden is that
Who will be the one who shows up in the playoffs, or is this going to be the one from Houston from a few years ago who disappeared in the most important stretches of those series?
I mean, he was hurt last year, but when he was on the court in that Milwaukee series, after basically saying he was, 10, 20, 30% healthy, he did not look like a player you'd want on the court. And obviously the injury, I think, was a big, big part of that, but he is not shown to be a player you can rely on in the postseason throughout his career. And it sucks to say that, but at the same time, this is, a great opportunity for him to flip that narrative right away. And, he has a series where he's getting to the line constantly and shooting 55% from the floor, which he's very capable of doing. That could swing this thing and make this a Philly in 5 kind of series very quickly. but I don't expect it. So I'm taking the Raptors. I'm taking the Raptors in 6.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think it's so contingent on whether James Harden becomes a factor, and like, well, not even a factor, just someone who can like really be a sidekick to James to Embiid, because I, I feel pretty good about Embiid having to step up, but with the pressure he's going to face against the Raptors, it's not as simple, I guess. But anyway, we should move on. And I think the other series to keep an eye out for, I mean, at least in the East, I feel pretty good about the Bucks beating the Bulls, and I feel really good about the Heat being whoever the play-in team is.
Is there anything in that Bucks Bulls series that we should be looking out for?
Well, in terms of the Bucks Bulls, I wonder how much of a factor. I know Zach LaVine's been dealing with some injuries, so I mean, if we want to, in order for them to steal a game, you're going to probably need Zach LaVine to go off. I think you can sort of depend on DeRozan to step up, but you need someone like Zach LaVine to step up. The Vucevic addition really didn't make much sense with the Bulls this year, but
I mean, Wendell Carter outplayed him. They would like that one back. I really believe that. But Wendell Carter just was not healthy in his first few years in Chicago, and they just felt like, let's go get a vet. Let's go get a guy who we know we can count on. But he did not look as good as he did in his Orlando days this year.
Yeah, is there anything that you think in terms of this series that is worth watching?
I'd be curious to see like DeRozan and LaVine more. I haven't seen a ton of Bulls games this year, but in terms of like how they take turns scoring and how they distribute the ball, is that something where if they're losing games to the Bucks, is that something that LaVine gets frustrated playing back seat to DeRozan? Because another guy who can be a free agent this summer is Zach LaVine. And it's a guy who wants to play second fiddle on a team that we think might get swept, right? Might lose in 5. So I'm curious to see the dynamic between those two superstar offensive players progresses in the case that the series does not go their way.
Yeah. I mean, those are great points. And I think we're going to be that sort of conversations is I think is going to be a common theme really throughout these whole playoffs, and which actually sets up a good transition into the other conference, the Western Conference Finals, or the Western Conference playoffs. The Utah Jazz are playing the Dallas Mavericks, right? Luka is expected to be out for that first game,
at least the first.
At least the first game, and so I think moving forward with this team, like, if the Utah Jazz lose against the Mavericks, I think we're talking about Donovan Mitchell potentially leaving the Jazz and potentially coming to the Knicks.
Yeah, I mean, when we'll talk about it again this summer, but like in terms of what would be the one acquisition the Knicks would want more than anything, we always bring back Donovan Mitchell. From here, he is that prototypical 2 guard who can play some point, he can score, he's on a reasonable contract. So I love the idea of going with turmoil in Utah to get, that team to pry away Donovan Mitchell. I don't think it's going to happen in terms of Mitchell getting traded, but they lose to a Luka-less Dallas team. I think that could be the opportunity Mitchell needs to be like, okay, get me out of here. It's time to move on. I'm in the belief that this team is just not built for a long playoff run. We've seen it time and time again that Rudy Gobert can get played off the floor when teams are playing small. This Dallas team is very capable of playing small. And so, Chris, I just really believe that this Utah team caught a huge break in this Luka situation. I mean, a calf strain to me is normally, I'm not a doctor. Don't call me Dr. Inman over here.
Wait, you're not a doctor?
But at the same time, a calf strain to me is not a day-to-day thing. It's usually something that keeps you out for weeks upon weeks. And so if Luka is going to miss this series or miss most of this series, I think Utah's going to take it.
It's one of those things where like you just can't help to wonder what will be the future of this Jazz next season, even if they advance. right? This team is not going to advance further than the second round. Let's be realistic about that. I wonder if that also puts pressure on the Jazz to push Rudy Gobert as well. It's just one of those
And
things
they would wind up playing. I mean, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but they would wind up playing the number 1 seeded Suns the next round, right? Who can play small, who can play big, and do all these things. So I really believe that they're in trouble whether Luka plays or not. They're either going to lose this week or they're going to lose in round 2.
And then I think moving forward with the series itself, you got to wonder about the health of Luka. If he doesn't play for the rest of the series, obviously we think the Jazz will win it. But I think if Luka comes back, it's a wrap. I think it's Dallas.
Yeah, if Luka plays, I just think they can contain him. And this is a team that prided itself on its defense solely for the fact that Rudy Gobert is amazing defensively in the post. But Luka can score in a lot of ways. He can score from 3-pointer, he can score from mid-range, and he can get other guys involved with his passing. So I just think he's going to be too much for them. And we've seen Donovan Mitchell go off in a playoff series. Remember, he had that one against Denver where he averaged basically like 40 points a game, and Jamal Murray was better, which is crazy. That was one of the better playoff series in the first round we've had in a while. But you're going to need that kind of effort from Mitchell if Luka's healthy.
I agree. And I think that's going to be a series that I'm going to watch. I'm going to be really on top of that one.
So are you taking Dallas regardless?
I think so.
Okay. Fair enough. I'm going to take Utah. I just don't think Luka's going to be able to go out there. Let's get to Warriors and Nuggets. I think this is the series I have the least feel for so far. And I just believe that what's Jamal Murray's status? We know Steph Curry is probable for game 1, but at the same time, how healthy is he? How healthy is Draymond Green, who's been having back problems all year? Are you going to get Defensive Player of the Year Draymond Green, or are you getting a guy who's kind of toughing it out? And I think because we don't know those things, I have no feel for this series. I'm going to take the Warriors. They have home court advantage, and they have the experience doing this. Clay is back. He's been better recently. I like their depth a little bit better because, the Nuggets are still missing 2 max players.
So that's another one that I keep mulling about, but I just really feel good about how Jokic matches up with the Warriors. There's nobody on the Warriors that can match up well against Jokic. And so it'll probably be an issue of scoring for Denver, but they've figured out ways all season. And I think the big difference between last season and this season is that they've figured it out without Jamal Murray and company. And they've sort of performed really well. And so I actually think the Nuggets might take this one. If Curry's not 100%, I think I take the Nuggets. I just wanted to add really one quick thing to the Jazz Mavs series. I fully believe the Mavs will win if Luka's back. If he's not back, then it's obviously the Jazz are going to win that. But anyway, back to the Warriors and back to the I missed my train of thought, but for me, the Warriors were a little bit overhyped during the season. It was obviously great to see them play well and look like shades of what they were, but it's just not the same team. They're led by younger players now, like people like Jordan Poole. Clay is just not the same. If Steph Curry does come back healthy, this is a different conversation.
I also believe that the Warriors defensively are going to be able to slow down Joker enough to make a difference in that series where he can't just go haywire in a couple of these games. They can throw different schemes at him. They can double, triple, and all these things that we've seen teams do against Joker in the playoffs before. And so that's why I think it's going to be different. I think this is going to be a great series. I think this is going to be a very high offensive scoring series. And I'm excited to see how that one plays out. Lastly, is this last? No, this is not last. We have Memphis, Minnesota. Minnesota winded up winning the play-in game against the Clippers. They celebrated like there was no tomorrow on the court, which people criticize them for. I don't get that at all. We can't tell our players, you know, give us more emotion, give us more, don't be a robot. But then when they do what we asked, we say you over celebrated, right? This is a team that's made the playoffs once in like 10 years. And so I really believe good for them. And I hope they can get a couple of these games and make this a series and really bring Minnesota basketball back on the map.
I know our friend Mitch would be really happy to see the Minnesota Timberwolves back on the map. And, I don't get it. People can never be happy. I mean, nothing the players do is okay. Nothing that, the fan, I mean, you just got to let people be. Like, I had no problem with Pat Beverly doing what he did. It was a very significant victory for him in his career. Like, that was huge to beat the Clippers, even if it was a playing game. So who cares? Like,
a team that traded him away, and he's a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve.
And if anything, emotions sort of bring out the best in sports. Like, those are the things that you remember. Those are the things that you KG when he won his first championship. Remember how iconic him holding the trophy?
Right. And that's what people are saying. They're acting like this is KG winning a title and not the Minnesota Timberwolves winning a play-in game to get to the playoffs. But I get it. I'm with you.
But listen, like, all the people who are criticizing that, it's like not everyone will get to the mountaintop like KG. So even getting to an NBA game, that is a victory for many players. That is a victory for many people. So if Pat Bev wants to celebrate this or whoever else, that's fine with me. I have no problem with it. But in terms of the series itself, I think they match up really well. But I still have to give the upper hand to the Grizzlies just because they're so deep. I think if they were facing an experienced team like the Clippers, I'd be more concerned. But quite frankly, I just don't see it. I think the Grizzlies role players are much better than what Timberwolves have, and you probably need Anthony Edwards, D'Lo, and Cat to play their best games every night in order for an upset to happen there.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It comes down to those three guys playing at their best at the same time, which we did not see in the play-in game. We saw Edwards go out of his mind. We saw Russell hit or miss, and we saw Towns not be good. And, this is year, 6 or 7 of Towns. He's 26. We got to get to the point, and we're going to get to that point this week. We kind of know more about what he is as a player. Is he a number 1 option? Is he a number 2 option? We're going to learn those things in terms of how he plays in this series. I think that's really important. How does the Grizzlies defend Anthony Edwards with Bain and with Brooks? How do those guys handle Russell and Edwards? Those guys are very not hit or miss. That sounds more. I mean, they're streaky. They're streaky guys where all of a sudden Edwards can put up 20 in a quarter. How do they handle that? Where do they basically not hide jaw on defense, but where do they hide jaw on defense? So I'm curious to see how all that plays out. But the most important matchup to me is Karl Anthony Towns and Jaren Jackson Jr. How does that play out? Towns was not great at playing. Go ahead.
Wait, so we don't think Valanciunas is going to be guarding? Oh, not Valanciunas. Steve Adams is going to be guarding him?
I don't think so. I mean, I think they might do that in spurts. Obviously, it's a long series, 4, 5, 6 games at least, right? So I think they will switch it up. But I think at the end of games, when they're looking for offense, I think Adams is on the bench. And I think they're more going with a Kyle Anderson who can play make at the 4 and maybe Jaren Jackson at the 5. How does that play out? Does Towns abuse Jaren Jackson, who I believe needs to put on a little weight? Jaren Jackson's had a ton of foul problems throughout his career so far. How does that play out? That's a matchup that Towns offensively needs to take advantage of. And then on the other end, Jaren Jackson's a guy who could space the floor. He's moving all around the court. How does Towns stick with him? Do they put Jared Vanderbilt on him and tell Towns you're not even getting that assignment? So how those two bigs handle this offensively and defensively, to me, is the most fascinating part of the series.
Well, the one other thing, but I don't know if this series will be like the indictment on Towns as a franchise player, but you got to wonder, like, the Timberwolves made on that run to beat the Clippers in the last few minutes of the game without Towns because he fouled out. So you got to wonder if the team starts to realize, okay, maybe we should be building around Anthony Edwards and not Towns, or maybe that's already happening and we're just like we're the last ones to know.
I don't think we're the last ones to know. I mean, they've shown no inclination that they want to trade Towns. I mean, obviously, things can change in the NBA quick, and if he comes off a series where he really lets them down, who knows? Maybe a team thinks they can get more out of him somewhere else. This is the only organization he's ever known, so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out because I think we're going to learn a lot more about Karl Anthony Towns this week, and I'm excited to see that.
I'm with you.
Last series, not much to discuss here. Suns versus the winners of Clippers Pelicans. Look, the Pelicans looked pretty good the other night. CJ McCollum at 27 in the first half. Ingram looked good, Valanciunas. This team has a pretty good foundation if they had Zion Williamson, right? Like if they had that big guy in the middle to go with CJ, Ingram, Valanciunas, and then these role players who are hustlers on defense like Herb Jones and Alvarado. I think that team is somebody who can cause fits for teams in the playoffs. That's not the team they have. So unfortunately, whether the Clippers win or the Pelicans win, I think this is going to be a Suns in 5 kind of situation.
Oh, it's. I like both teams. I like the Pelicans and the Clippers. The Clippers tend to be very they consistently hit above their weight, and they're just getting Paul George back. I'm of the belief that the Pelicans probably deserve it. Not deserve it. That's not fair. I think the Pelicans would be more interesting, and I think that'll be more beneficial for that franchise moving forward than the Clippers going in. The Clippers had no expectations going in. Wait, sorry, Steve. If I'm not mistaken, doesn't the winner of that game impact the Knicks as well? Because I believe if the Clippers win, if the
Pelicans.
If the Pelicans win, the Knicks get 1 win less, and so they move up in the draft, correct?
I didn't know that. I guess the playoff teams would all go at the bottom, so that does make sense to me. So go Pelicans. Let's go from 12 to 11. I'm with it. And it would be great for that franchise because they can go to Zion and be like, "Look, we're a playoff team without you. Bringing you in, we can really do some damage here. So let's get going. This is your 4th year. Show us that you're great, and we'll get you the money."
Honestly, I'm almost rooting for the Pelicans not to sign him. I know it sounds insane what I'm saying, and I know that Zion's an incredibly talented player, but there's something to be said that it's just not fair that the Pelicans were basically left out to dry. They figured it out. They got CJ, and I think it's just, I don't know. There's an element to that I don't find fair, but maybe it's something that we don't know what's going on in the background.
Well, we clearly don't know what's going on. I mean, before the game, you have Zion doing windmill dunks in warmups. Where is he? Why? I'm not saying maybe he's got some injury that we don't know about, but he's warming up as if he's getting ready for the finals, and he's not playing. There's no update on him. He keep putting up, posts of him dunking in practice and stuff like that. So what's going on?
Imagine if the Pelicans move on and then it's Zion in the first round versus the Suns. That's kind of, must see TV, but I'm not expecting it, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about it before, but there's so many injury situations that can swing series. Steph Curry, Jamal Murray, we mentioned Zion, obviously, Ben Simmons, but he's not going to help much. Luka, and this is just, playoffs haven't even started yet. Injuries happen. And so I'm curious. I hope the injuries don't cause this playoffs to go the way it's going to go. And I hope it's really about, guys hitting big shots and making big plays versus who wasn't around. But the Zion thing is interesting. And I think we're not going to know the answer to what's going on there for years.
Agree there, Stevie. So in terms of these playoffs, is there anything else that you're looking at in terms of teams or any particular players that we haven't mentioned?
I would just stress with Utah that this is just so important for them. And for them, they kind of remind me of Portland last year, where it's just like they just have to get this done. They can't underachieve, because if they do, does Gobert want out? Does Mitchell want out? The people who've been running this team are still around, but now Danny Ainge is in charge. And Trader Danny did not draft Mitchell or Gobert or any of these guys. And if they keep underachieving like they have the last 2 years, what's stopping him from saying, let's blow this thing up? Let's go in another direction. So I think they're the team you have to watch more than anything.
I'm with you there. And I think in terms of our own personal interest, like it really makes me wonder about there was another player that I was thinking of, but Donovan Mitchell obviously stands out as a player that how would he would be in a different scenery,
Yeah, I'm excited to see how that plays out. And, he's one of our favorites. His dad works for the Mets. He's a big Met fan. So what's not to like with him? New York guy. So I just, I'm excited, and we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Let's get to our final thoughts right after this. All right, Chris, final thoughts here. The only thing really on my mind is what is going on with the Lakers. They win this not big game, but they win a hard-fought game against the Nuggets in overtime. And then all these reports come out that Frank Vogel is being fired. They ask him at his press conference, do you know anything? What's going on? He says, I don't know anything. Haven't been told anything. They make him to come to work the next day, and then they fire him there. And so I just thought they handled that so poorly. And the talk of, we like Quinn Snyder, we like Nick Nurse, those guys are not gettable for the Lakers. They're not. Doc Rivers, unless one of these guys gets surprise fired and then decides, I'm going to take the Lakers job over what could be better options, I don't see it. I think they're going to have to settle for a coach out of the league looking to rebound like Mark Jackson.
I feel like there's such a public disdain for the Lakers right now, but not in a way where it's because they're good. It's because they're so incompetent and just making continuously bad decisions. And I feel like the Lakers are falling into the trap that many executives sometimes do, and falling for the nostalgia sort of leadership style where they hire people that they somewhat know or have been involved with the organization in some capacity. Magic Johnson, Rob Pelinka. And now you have the LeBron clutch added element to it. And it just seems like the Lakers did not deserve all the attention they did this year. And it's such a shame, because there was plenty of good other storylines. Listen, we talked about it here on this podcast as well. It's obviously news that the Lakers are underachieving, but they did not deserve our breath as much as they did.
They wouldn't have had it, though, if they weren't a combination of the Lakers and with LeBron James. If they didn't have either one of those mystiques, I don't think they get any attention this year.
I don't think you're wrong, but regardless,
you're right.
They still got the attention. And listen, maybe if AD is healthy, it's a different conversation, but he wasn't. So in terms of who I like as their coach, I don't think it matters who coaches that team, because we know it doesn't really matter. I think that the person that probably makes most sense is probably Fizdale, because he's right there, easy. He's just someone who's going to be
I feel LeBron with
a figurehead. They're not. Mark Jackson, I feel would be the last straw in terms of this disaster. But if you're talking about just hoping for Anthony Davis to get better, one, correcting some of the players that they sign players that fit the team more, I don't know how they're going to do it with the limited cap space. But, it's not over. I mean, I think the team could still make some moves that can make it interesting. So maybe they don't need to do much in terms of a coaching change. So I think someone like Fizdale makes the most sense.
It's the fascinating thing for me is, do they attach that 2027 first rounder and possibly the 2029 first rounder, the only two first rounders they have over the next decade? Do they attach those to Russell Westbrook to turn that into a quality player who can help LeBron and Davis? Or do they say LeBron and Davis, like LeBron's old and Davis is always hurt, let's just see how we are with basically the same team? And how they play that, it's going to be fascinating, because other than trading Westbrook's salary for more help, I can't really see where they can make big moves on this team.
Oh, I can give you one. They could just trade him for Randall. We help both. We'll help each other.
Russell Westbrook and that 2027 first for Randall and Fournier. Who says no? That's what I keep coming back to. And I think it makes, maybe I'm thinking of it from a Knicks perspective, but I think it makes a lot of sense from both sides.
I don't mind that at all. I mean, I like Fournier, but I think that makes sense.
Well, that is going to do it for us here on the All Hoops podcast. Chris, thank
you
as always.
Who do you think the coach is going to be?
I like your Fizdale idea. I think that makes sense. I think Mark Jackson's a guy who could get that job. I personally love listening to him and Breen and Van Gundy on the ESPN telecast. I kind of hope he sticks around for a bit, but if not, it would be good for him to get another opportunity. He got raked through the coals last time, right? Maybe a lot of that was probably true. Maybe some of it wasn't. I don't know. I'm not in that room, but at the same time, it would be cool to see a Knick legend get another opportunity. So,
well, what? Did you call him a Knick legend?
Yeah. Okay. Isn't he not? Or how about let's call him a New York legend. How about that? Is that better?
That's
St. John's
better.
Guy, Knicks. A lot of the damage he did was against the Knicks with him as a pacer. So all right, we'll call him a New York legend. We'll settle with that. But that is going to do it for us here on the All Hoops podcast. Chris, thank you as always. And to our great fans and listeners, enjoy the playoff basketball.
Bye, everyone.